Am I audible? Okay. Good morning, His Holiness Swami Shri Hari Prasad Ji, the dignitaries, guests, colleagues, and fellow seekers of peace. So when I got this huge honor to speak at this conference, I was not sure what I would talk about until I came across the sub-theme, which was the impact of migration on peace and security. Now, something about the word migration tugged at my heart. And to give you a bit of a context, I'm a Kashmiri Pandit, but like my father, I was born and brought up in Delhi. And in Kashmir, I was not Kashmiri enough, and in Delhi, I was not a pure Delhiite. And in Delhi, I grew up eating authentic Kashmiri food, trying to learn the language, following all the rituals, and doing that Herat Puja, which is Mahashivratri, which is a very important festival of Kashmiri Pandits. And this was all under the pressure to retain our culture because we could not go back to the valley. And I suppose that is why this theme struck a chord with me. And I come to you not only as a counseling psychologist, but as a human being deeply committed to healing of individuals and communities, and ultimately our shared humanity. Now, after more than a decade in family business, my journey took a heartfelt turn towards psychology, which was fueled by a curiosity about human spirit and a desire to walk with people through their journey of pain and life. And now I bring that same lens of empathy today in understanding one of the most emotionally charged and under-addressed human rights tragedies in modern South Asia, which is the Kashmir exodus. And I believe this is not just a political issue, it's a psychological one as well. It is about the trauma, displacement, and the fundamental need for justice. And without justice, there can be no true reconciliation, which is why I'm here to speak not from a place of ideology, but from a place of human compassion. In 1990, amid rising insurgency and escalating violence, a large number of Kashmiri Pandits, which were a historically rooted Hindu minority, were forced to flee their homes in the Kashmir Valley. And this was not a migration, it was an expulsion, which happened overnight as well. It was complete, brutal in nature. And it was not just about the loss of livelihood, it was a loss of identity, a loss of belonging, and the home. And for any psychologist or humanitarian, I believe, this wound transcends geography. This was an emotional exile, and that fractured generations, because there's a concept of intergenerational trauma, which happens in conflict zones and war zones, and even for children of that particular community which are not born in the conflict zone, but later outside of it, also go through intergenerational trauma because they're inheriting grief in a deeper context. So just imagine waking up one day and realizing that your very home, the land of your ancestors, is not your home anymore. And it's now unsafe, and the very culture that you helped shape now feels absent in your narrative. And the Kashmir exodus is also about the psychological boundaries which were shattered and about the hearts which were left without maps. And one of the most painful truths about forced migration is that it never ends when people leave. The trauma is generational, like I mentioned about the intergenerational trauma, and I'm also a part of it, even though I was born and brought up in Delhi. And I used to visit Kashmir as a tourist. So imagine this is coming from someone for whom Kashmir is a home, but never was a home, perhaps never would be a home, perhaps could be a home. So imagine my plight, And so the trauma unspoken is the trauma which is growing all the time. It's not addressed, if it's not addressed. And when I was engaging with my families, my extended families, and the other people who were displaced families in nature, So my understanding and observation was that how unresolved pain can fester into isolation and loss of faith or belief in something, which relates to the concept of radical disillusionment. So the terminology I will explain here briefly. Radical disillusionment is a profound and widespread loss of faith or belief in something, often involving a complete shift in perspective or a sense of betrayal. It's a state of being deeply disillusioned, intensely disappointed, and leading to a rejection of previously held values or beliefs. If unacknowledged, trauma becomes the soil in which the resentment and distrust take root. And unresolved trauma is not just a personal issue, it's an issue that grows in the very fabric of community in the form of physical and emotional safety. A community that feels unheard or unseen can become fragmented, and fragmented societies rarely heal. And we often talk about peace as if it is the opposite of war, but I believe that is not true. Peace is the presence, the subjective or perceived presence of justice, and not merely the absence of violence. And justice is not only about punishment, it is about acknowledgement, restoration, and healing. It is about saying that what happened to you, it matters. You matter. And for the Kashmiri Pandit community, justice has remained elusive and abstract. Efforts to return home have faltered, and calls for reparations or even recognition have often been politically inconvenient and communally unsafe. And in that vacuum, silence has been the loudest response. The longer we delay justice, the more brittle peace becomes. So where do we go from here is the question. And the path forward, it must be, perhaps it could be reconciliation, but not the superficial kind. It is not about forgetting the past, it's about facing it courageously with compassion and responsibility, and perhaps without blame. That means we are creating safe spaces for dialogue between communities, both for those who fled and those who stayed. So by extension, it's about engaging in dialogue with Kashmiri Pandit community as well as Kashmiri Muslim community. Neither should be overlooked or ignored. And it's about acknowledging all the narratives of suffering without bias. Again, when I say acknowledging the narratives, it should be for both the communities, Kashmiri Pandit and Kashmiri Muslim communities. And institutional support for return, resettlement, and cultural preservation, and truth-telling mechanisms that document the pain, the honor, and the memory of what was lost. Because healing doesn't begin with answers, it begins with listening. And why this matters beyond Kashmir is because, why should the world care about one regional conflict, I would ask, if it's about Kashmir. But Kashmir is not unique. The trauma of forced migration is a global wound. In Syria, Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, people are fleeing, there is violence, people are losing home, and they are carrying grief. So the Kashmir exodus is a mirror, it's a painful reflection of what happens when we let injustice linger and wounds fester. And conversely, it is a lesson also that justice, when served with empathy and accountability, becomes the need for reconciliation, the seed for reconciliation, not just in Kashmir, but everywhere. Now, as a spiritual person and as a therapist, I deeply believe in human capacity to heal through relating and engaging in dialogue. But healing takes time, presence, and courage. Peace is not something that we impose. It is something we cultivate through humility, through repair, and through remembering. To truly honor the theme, peace is born of justice, we must move from theory to truth, from silence to speech, from retribution to restoration. Now let me leave you with this. The Kashmir exodus is a human story, it's not a political footnote. It's a cry for recognition, for justice, and for return, not just to land, but to dignity and survival of a cultural identity. So what can we do? We can listen. Let's make room for painful stories to be told without defensiveness. Educate. We share the truth about what happened and what is still happening. We push for policies that support displaced communities with dignity and fairness, and we unite. Now, let this not be a story that divides us, but the one that calls us all to deeper empathy. Peace is not a diplomatic slogan, it's a psychological condition. It is the ability to feel safe, seen, and respected. If we want peace in Kashmir, we must first give the displaced their voice back. If we want reconciliation in the world, we must begin by asking, who have we forgotten and whose wounds have we ignored? Because in the end, peace is not born in treaties. It is born in justice and nurtured by a willingness to walk together through pain towards something better. The story of Kashmiri Pandit exodus is not just a chapter in the history of Kashmir. It is a human story of migration, trauma, and the quest for justice. It's a story that resonates far beyond the borders of Kashmir, touching on the universal need for healing, for recognition, and reconciliation in conflict zones. As we move forward, we must remember that justice is the foundation of peace. True peace can only emerge when we face our past and perhaps on an individual level, confront our injustices and work together to build a future where every voice is heard, every person is respected, and every community is treated with dignity. And I personally believe that one of the most important factors here is the acknowledgement and moving away from denial, which engages both the communities. Because if we want to even think of engaging in dialogue, arriving at a solution, and think of reconciliation, we must, in the first place, acknowledge that what led to exodus, what happened, and what happened to both sides of the community. Thank you.
The final speaker.